The US empire, unable to accept the sovereignty, progress, and moral example of the Bolivarian Revolution, is escalating its aggressive attacks against Venezuela. This is not an isolated fight. It is yet another front in the struggle against US imperialism, and it is interlocked with our movements for liberation in Haiti, Palestine, and across the global south. We have seen this playbook before. The accelerated militarization and occupation of Haiti over the last 4 years violated the concept of a zone of peace and served as a dire warning for the rest of our region. The racist labeling of gangs, a consequence of the crisis of imperialism, as terrorist organizations in Haiti, has now been deployed against Venezuela, where the US Department of War cynically compares Al-Qaeda. This is a transparent tactic to justify their imperialist bloodlust and lay the groundwork for further intervention. Despite these challenges, the steadfast people of Venezuela joined civilian militias in the millions to defend their homeland and enforce peace. We applaud the Bolivarian Revolution and in unwavering solidarity with the Venezuelan people's right to defend their sovereignty. This moment demands a coordinated and powerful response from our movements. We must pull together our forces to expose these lies, broaden the scope of our analysis, and take to the streets. This urgent strategic meeting convenes to understand and oppose the violent imperialist assault on the principle and material reality of a zone of peace in our Americas, with a specific focus on the attack on Venezuela and the Caribbean. We will focus on collective strategies for resisting US-led imperialism from various movements by making critical analysis of the United States' ongoing economic and political warfare against Venezuela and broader violence against peoples and nations in the Caribbean. The discussion will extend the complicity of comprador elites within CARICOM nations who endanger Caribbean solidarity and provide a humanitarian veil for alignment with US aggression by blaming regional crises on targeted nations like Venezuela, making it militarization and imperialist controlled gangs in Haiti, and parroting imperial narrative broadly. Our overarching goal is to set the foundation for collective action toward building a popular, grassroots-based zone of peace in our America. So we will have a review of the agenda and the format, the objectives. We're going to start off with opening conflicts, not just in the Caribbean, but throughout the region with Dr. Tamanisha J, Caribbean Solidarity Network, and the focus will be conveying historical and contemporary context to ground us in today's conversation. And then we will have a roundtable of 4 magnificent speakers throughout the region to address some of the questions we've posed to them for about 5 minutes each as a primer for the audience to engage dialogue around strategic. And then we will move into seeing a tool that we have developed, continually developed, which is the US militarization in our Americas map. And then we can actually potentially have strategies of resistance coming from that. And then we'll open it up to participants we have a few questions that again can ground us not just in making this collective analysis, but move towards collective action. So the guidelines for that will be about 3-minute interventions for any of the participants that wish to say something. And then we can, like I said, focus on strategic and concrete possible collective action. So without any further ado, I would love to hand it over to Tamanisha J.
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, in case people are in other parts of the world. But my name is Tamanisha, and I was tasked today with providing some contextual remarks for the conversation. Should I stop after every sentence so that the translators can? Okay.
If you
I'm not
speak
too
slowly,
sure.
you'll be good. Just speak slowly, you'll be okay. You don't have to stop after every sentence.
Okay. I'm not too sure how far back the context I am to give must go, but since my remarks are not to be longer than 15 minutes, I will frame the current US airstrike campaign in the region that have resulted in the extrajudicial murders of 62 Caribbean and Latin American peoples. Given that the Mexican Navy was unable to locate the survivor of the October 29th airstrike after 96 hours had passed. I will then provide context for the lack of affirmative Caribbean or CARICOM response at the level of government to these murders. And then, given that I'm somewhat representing the Caribbean Solidarity Network, which is based in Canada, I will highlight that these actions by the US are not removed or divorced from its partners in Canada or in Europe, where you also don't see condemnations of the strikes really happening either. And finally, I will end off with my question, which I will preface here by noting that it regards the creation of regional information networks and news in all of the various languages so that our people are informed and their actions can receive regional and local support when they do protest these events. On September 1st, 2025, the day before it would become public information that a United States military airstrike occurred in the Caribbean Sea, Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar rejected claims by Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro that the growing presence of US troops and warships in the southern Caribbean Sea aimed to pose a threat to Venezuela. However, the truth was that on the day that the Trinidadian PM lied about US military activities in the region, the US government had already quietly begun its airstrike campaign in the Caribbean Sea. The first target was a boat in Sucre, which lies between Venezuela and Trinidad, and it was bombed on Monday, September 1st, after leaving Venezuela on Sunday, August 31st. That the airstrike and extrajudicial murder of 11 people aboard the boat occurred and was publicly announced by the US government on Tuesday, given grainy video on social media that showed a small boat being destroyed by an aerial bomb. The day after, it was confirmed that the US conducted an airstrike in the Caribbean Sea, murdering 11. Trinidadian PM Kamla Persad-Bissessar declared that drug traffickers should all be killed violently. Meanwhile, CARICOM sent communications to the United States requesting a warning in advance when it conducts airstrikes in the Caribbean Sea. Based on the actions of the Trinidadian government, which includes lying to Venezuela, and the PM's response after US military action was confirmed to have killed in the region, it is not illogical to assume that Trinidad and Tobago was privy to war information of some kind that the US intended to provoke Venezuela for the purposes of regime change in that country. Additionally, after 32 people were murdered in the Caribbean Sea by October 14th, over a month after the US airstrike campaign in the region began, CARICOM, save for Trinidad and Tobago, released a presser affirming the region to be a zone of peace. However, this presser failed to affirmatively reject U.S. militarism and extrajudicial murders in the region at all. As of today, November 2nd, an official statement by the Guyana-based CARICOM Secretariat has yet to be put out. The slowness of CARICOM's presser, and that as of October 30th, there has still yet to be an official CARICOM statement, cannot be separated from the fact that after the U.S. first airstrike in the region was confirmed, Jamaica, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago stood with a minority of states in the region to side with U.S. imperialism, preventing the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, or CELAC, from producing an official statement in opposition to growing U.S. extra-regional military deployments. While the silence from CARICOM and the initial actions by 3 out of 4 of the CARICOM founders to stand against U.S. military buildup in the region is questionable, it is imperative that we understand that almost 52% of CARICOM's budget is financed by external donors. And when you break down CARICOM's security initiatives, those are almost mainly and exclusively financed by the United States, Canada, and European states. This is important as it means that CARICOM security institutions, or its foreign policy collaboration and coordination, mostly function as implementing agencies managing externally funded projects, which includes security. As a large external funder, the United States and its allies in Canada and Europe end up guiding Caribbean security policies and developing the security institutions and organizations in the region. Thus, a large portion of Caribbean security is dependent on the political whims, preferences, and objectives of external donors. For example, Canada uses its training facilities in Jamaica to train the Guyana Defense Forces in security for oil rig platforms. Notably, neither Guyana nor Jamaica owns oil rig platforms for which the Guyana Defense Forces is being trained by Canada and its allies to protect. One can hypothesize that these learned military tactics and techniques to protect foreign-owned and operated oil rigs in the region will be used against Caribbean nationals and regional residents. One can hypothesize that these learned military tactics and techniques to protect foreign-owned and operated oil rigs will be used against Caribbean nationals and regional residents who may be opposed to foreign oil platforms. And in Guyana, this includes ongoing protests, foremost amongst them being from indigenous groups, African groups, and indigenous peoples against ExxonMobil in the country. In the week that the presser was published by CARICOM, something interesting in the presser was that CARICOM opted to utilize the zone of peace language. This was not due to any pushback against imperialism in the region, but instead speaks to the fact that Caribbean states lack capabilities like nuclear weapons that could deter the militarism of other states, especially that of the United States. Nonetheless, there is still a hypocrisy with CARICOM using this term, given its funding and its ideological development orientation. For instance, interventions and invasions in the region have been commonplace, including after 2014. It is not accidental that in the same year that drones were given the green light to operate in Haiti, with support from CARICOM, that airstrikes are now happening in the region. The drones in Haiti that murdered 8 children in September were made in Canada. The images of US airstrikes bombing boats that we get to see on social media have also been created and made in Canada, the technology for those videos. And for 2 decades, Haitians have had to deal with the United States and others installing illegitimate governments in that country, while Caribbean and Latin American states launder myths on security assistance, ignoring that the biggest security threat for Haitians has been the denial of their right to sovereignty and self-determination that is not dictated by Western imperialism. Now, it is the same threat that has been extended to other states in the region more forcefully for US national security interests. Here, it is imperative that everyone understands that development and security are not neutral terms, but have a class politic and geopolitical implication that stem from them. Development, as is proliferated in too much of the Caribbean, is capitalistic, thus exploitative, serving to allow mechanisms of colonial drain to operate due to the lavish accommodations afforded to foreign capital in these economies and societies. For instance, in the wake of Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica, it is not surprising to see foreign and private investors aiming to consolidate the land of those that have been dispossessed and displaced from their homes in the wake of environmental disaster. This accommodation of largely Western foreign investors, due to the colonial history in the region, creates an incentive to hold in high esteem the whims of the external environment at the expense of the internal one, factually maintaining a situation of dependency under the guise of development, even as what gets promoted for people in the region is under development. Similarly, the same is true of security, wherein external security preferences are propped up at the expense of addressing the root of crime in the Caribbean. Given the fact that crime exists at the intersection of poverty and the capitalist system that these states uphold in such dependent ways. For instance, in the Caribbean region, there are high rates of unemployment and underemployment. Simultaneously, these states aim to record economic growth through exporting agricultural and commodity goods into global North countries. If you are someone unemployed or underemployed in the Caribbean, and there is market demand in the global North for quote unquote drugs that perpetuates crime in states, there is now an incentive given to you to engage in illicit activities, not because you want to, but because your poverty, unemployment, and the capitalist system demands it. That fact exists alongside the fact that weapons are not manufactured in the Caribbean region. And in the Caribbean region, there is no massive consumer demand for drugs. And these facts exist alongside the fact also that the United States perpetuates drug issues or drug environments in Latin American and Caribbean states. People can talk about CIA involvement in the drug trade, but even if we ignore those involvements, the pressures of poverty and the capitalist system still exist for people in these places. I will close off these remarks by talking about Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is still an occupied Caribbean territory. that is essentially used as a staging ground for the United States, both within the Caribbean Sea and the wider Atlantic, helping to secure the Panama Canal. And Puerto Rico has a long history of being used as a staging ground for US imperialism in the region. Each time the United States reactivates its bases in Puerto Rico to be used as a staging ground in the region, it comes with the mass arrests and detentions of Puerto Ricans that stand in opposition to US military buildup. And so while we are focusing on military aggression and antagonisms towards Venezuela, we must also be reminded that those that are currently being oppressed by US military buildup more directly are people in Puerto Rico itself who are being displaced and terrorized by US Navy and military personnel. I read a report this morning where someone interviewed revealed that military personnel in Puerto Rico in this current iteration of US military buildup are asking about Puerto Rican women to be used to pleasure military personnel. And so that cannot be forgotten from this story. As we also focus on the bombastness of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, we must also remember that Guyana has allowed US vessels to enter its territory by sea as part of security operations in the region. We should also remember that prior to Hurricane Melissa, Andrew Holness, who is the current leader this session of CARICOM, has also okayed US military buildup in the region. To answer the question, what strategic actions does the Caribbean Solidarity Network see as critical to opposing US imperialist actions in our Americas, which I prefaced a bit at the beginning, I will note information shared by comrades in that organization. First, we recognize the importance of mass mobilization efforts with media coverage as ideal right now. People should call out those with platforms who have been woefully silent, and we are not talking about social media platforms. We are thinking about the trade union leaders. This is important because it is suspected that the Minister of Homeland Security in Trinidad implied that the recent escalation of military preparedness could be used to censor protests that could happen in Trinidad for two reasons. First, the extension of the state of emergency in Trinidad, and second, using Trinidad as a staging ground for US imperialist interventions against Venezuela by a government that received, I believe, less than 30 or close to 30% of the votes, since many Trinidadians did not show up to participate in the election. The biggest trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago have not said anything to condemn anything less than advocating for a zone of peace, and their condemnations as well as their mobilization of people could be very strong, as they have historically had the capacity to turn around these events which affect workers as well. At the same time, there is nothing preventing trade unions in North America to also engage in anti-war mobilizations there or here. So again, calling out trade unions. in terms of what questions we have for other movements throughout the hemisphere in terms of collective action. First, how do we create regional networks of communication and news that strengthens solidarity across language and national boundaries? Here, we are thinking about the importance of the information battle and how informed people are more likely to act in transformative ways. And I will end my comments there. Sorry if I went over time or if I spoke too quickly.
No, thank you, Tamanisha, for the wonderful introduction. I know we could listen to you all day, and I appreciate the information, the questions, and the intervention. I think in particular, I just want to highlight again what Tamanisha said, Dr. John said about the importance of mass mobilization with media coverage, the importance of calling out the silence of trade union leaders, and then the importance of regional networks and news and communication, particularly from the people. So I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Austin Cole. I am one of the national co-coordinators of the Black Alliance for Peace and a member of the Popular Steering Committee for a Zone of Peace in our Americas. I am taking over for Clau because of, as we all know, the internet connection can be a challenge. And we know in particular in Ecuador, ruled currently by the narco-capitalist regime of Daniel Noboa, that is particularly the case. So thank you all for bearing with us with some of the technical as we make some shifts. So we're going to move to our roundtable. And we will hear, and I'll introduce all of the speakers at once, and then I'll let them go and provide their 5-minute interventions to kick off this conversation. But just as a reminder, again, that this space is this meeting, right, that we wanted to convene to have some context and to think about how are we actually understanding and opposing the current violent imperialist assault throughout our hemisphere. As Tamanisha mentioned, how are we connecting across various parts of the hemisphere, across languages, across cultures, across movements and capacities and institutions to be able to oppose US-led imperialism in our region and create a true zone of peace from the grassroots up. So to introduce our speakers and to let everyone know the questions, these are the questions that our speakers will be generally responding to, and they will also be the same question. They are also the questions that we will pose to the group when we open it up in the second hour of this conversation. So those 3 questions that each of our speakers will address for 5 minutes as to start the conversation, for the rest of us to engage in dialogue around our strategic discussions are: 1, what strategic actions do you see as critical to opposing US imperialist actions in our Americas? 2, what specific context from your region or nation is important for other movements and organizations to know? And 3, what questions do you have for other movements throughout the hemisphere in terms of collective action? So to start that conversation, we will turn first, and we'll go in this order. We will turn first to our comrade Chucho Garcia, who is the Venezuelan ambassador to Benin and part of the Red de Organizaciones Afro-Venezolanas, the network of Afro-Venezuelan organizations, After Chucho speaks, we will go to David Abdullah, who's joining us from Trinidad and Tobago and is a leader of the movement for social justice in that country and part of the Assembly of Caribbean Peoples. Then we will hear from Ivana Delgado from the Movimiento Afro Nacional Ecuatoriano, the African Movement, National Movement of Ecuador. Apologies for my brain stopped for a second. And then we will hear from Brianna Alvarado Ramos from Diaspora Palante Collective in Puerto Rico, and who is also several of whom are members of the steering committee as well. So without further ado, I will pass it to our comrade Chucho Garcia. Hermano Chucho, tiene la palabra.
Bueno, ¿cómo están todas y todos? Como saben, bueno, mi nombre es Jesús Chucho García. En estos momentos soy embajador de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela, aquí en Cotonú, República de Benín. Es un país que queda en África del Oeste y del cual debemos mucho de la cultura en la diáspora. De aquí, de este lugar, salió la espiritualidad del vudú, y recordemos que fue en Haití en agosto del año 1771 cuando una mujer llamada Cecil Fátima en una ceremonia vudú llamó a la rebelión en Haití, que después va a concretar Toussaint Louverture.
Yo no escucho.
¿Aló?
Sí, escuchamos. No sé si Ivana,
It's
si
possible
hay...
that she's in a different sorry, Austin, I apologize.
No, it's okay. Ivana,
I'm here in Spanish. I'm here in Spanish.
Okay. For the interpreters, for the Spanish room, just to be, si estás escuchando en español, tienen que poner su audio original. Tienen que poner audio original si estás escuchando en español. Ok, Chucho.
Muy bien, entonces fue donde surgió la espiritualidad vudú.
¿Alguien está
Esa
hablando?
espiritualidad...
No escucho.
Aló,
Sí,
estoy
Noé.
hablando. Estoy hablando.
Sigue, Chucho, sigue. Yo voy a hablar con Ivana.
Muy bien, concreto. Entonces, fue de aquí, de Benín, Antigua Dahomey, donde nació la espiritualidad del vudú, y esa espiritualidad del vudú fue una espiritualidad de la rebelión que permitió que en Haití se diera la rebelión liderizada por una mujer llamada Cecil Fátima. Después de esa rebelión del vudú, en 1771, con Toussaint Louverture, después se va a concretar la primera nación libre, no solo del Caribe, sino de toda América, como lo fue Haití, en el 1804, con Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Y en la primera constitución, la más revolucionaria del siglo XIX, fue la de Haití. ¿Por qué? Porque eliminó la trata de esclavos, eliminó la esclavitud y también respetó la religión tradicional. Todo esto viene porque es en el Caribe, y ahora esta zona que estamos discutiendo como zona de paz, fue donde nació la independencia de América Latina y el Caribe. Porque si Petión no hubiese ayudado a Bolívar a hacer la guerra de independencia, Venezuela no hubiese podido lograr su independencia. Tenemos que agradecerlo en Haití, pero también tenemos que agradecerlo a Jamaica, hizo la Carta de Jamaica. También tenemos que agradecerlo a Cartagena, porque fue a Cartagena, en Colombia, donde Bolívar hizo el manifiesto de Cartagena. Simbólicamente, el Caribe para nosotros en Venezuela y para Colombia y para muchos países de América Latina es la cuna de la libertad. Repito, el Caribe es la cuna de la libertad. Por eso, después, con el destino manifiesto de Estados Unidos, comenzaron a atacar al Caribe para quitarle toda su independencia. Comenzaron por quitar la independencia de Puerto Rico. Intentaron quitarle la independencia a Cuba. Intentaron después con los golpes de Estado el Caribe continental, llámese Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras. Todo el imperialismo norteamericano intentó de eliminar el Caribe como zona de rebelión y como zona de paz. Hoy, para nosotros es muy importante la combinación del Caribe insular, el Caribe de las islas, con el Caribe continental, con el Caribe de tierra. Una reunión en Caracas con todos los parlamentarios, con muchos parlamentarios del Caribe. Cuando Chávez llega al poder, va a reafirmar ese carácter del Caribe, cuando crea Petrocaribe, para ser solidario con la energía del petróleo y del gas. Por eso después Chávez también va a crear la CELAC, que es la Comunidad de Estados Latinoamericanos y del Caribe. Estoy recordando ahí a mi amigo Ayamo, que está en ese momento, cuando ocurrió lo de Katrina, el huracán Katrina en New Orleans, que él me envió allí para apoyar. También Chávez apoyó y Chávez lanzó algo bien bonito, que fue el cheaper oil para los sectores menos favorecidos con el invierno en Estados Unidos. No solo en New Orleans, sino en toda la costa sur, sino en toda la parte sur de Estados Unidos, hasta llegar al Midwest, hasta Minneapolis, donde yo y otros activistas logramos la solidaridad con Estados Unidos. Hoy sabemos que tenemos la amenaza. Cuando Donald Trump dice que enviará la CIA, no, la CIA está y continúa en Venezuela, buscando cualquier oportunidad para la invasión. En el primer gobierno de Trump se hicieron 3 intentos de invasión. 3 intentos de invasión a Venezuela. Ahora en este segundo gobierno de Trump está la amenaza permanente, pero en esta oportunidad la geopolítica ha cambiado porque tenemos socios como China, tenemos socios como Rusia, que también están alerta ante esa situación. Tenemos el socio del BRIC, que es importante. Tenemos ahora el socio de Colombia, que antes de Petro, Colombia era un estado paramilitar y ahora con Petro las cosas han cambiado. Yo pienso que en este momento la unidad de los pueblos del Caribe y de tierra firme se hace más importante. Nosotros aquí mismo en África, nosotros hemos promovido actividades de paz y de solidaridad, como lo viene planteando la Alianza Negra. En estos días hicimos una tremenda reunión con activistas de aquí de Benín, también de Togo, así como también de Ghana, en la lucha en la lucha panafricanista. Entonces, yo creo en estos momentos se trata de vincularnos más, con más fuerza. También ser muy solidario en este momento con Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico tiene que en algún momento ser libre. Tiene que ser libre porque sí. Tenemos que volver al planteamiento de Albizus Campus, ¿me entiendes? Y de toda la lucha que lleva el pueblo de Puerto Rico. Entonces, reciban un gran saludo solidario desde África. Un gran abrazo a la Alianza Negra. Venceremos. Muchas gracias.
Venceremos. Gracias, Chucho. Thank you, Chucho, for the strong words. Y David.
Greetings to everyone. I hope that you are hearing me okay. Yes? Okay.
Yes.
So the first question, what strategic actions does your organization see as critical to opposing US imperialist actions in our Americas? I want to back up and say, first of all, that it's important to note that for many decades, the issue of imperialism, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, has not been in focus in the English-speaking Caribbean, not part of the language in the English-speaking Caribbean. And this is largely due to the focus by progressive movements in the late 80s and into the 90s on structural adjustment policies that were impacting negatively on the working class and the poor and on the country's development. And so while we called out the Washington Consensus, which included, of course, the State Department, the IMF, World Bank, and so on, the focus was very much on the local. The struggles were around local issues against structural adjustment, later what we call the neoliberalism. However, the genocide by Israel of Palestinians in Gaza and the apartheid colonial Israeli occupation of the West Bank, and now the US military deployment in the Southern Caribbean, these things and what has happened in the Sahel have enabled progressive movements to clearly identify the colonial and imperial agenda of the US and Western Europe, because they're self-evident to so many people. It's not an abstraction. And the actions of Trump and the Monroe Doctrine on steroids, as I call it, can be obviously seen and understood by the people. Now, the two strategic actions that are critical in our view are, first of all, education and information, to enable people to understand exactly the nature of imperialism and to counter the false narratives that are being peddled to justify the actions by the United States. And in doing so, we have to connect the dots. Gaza and Palestine, the blockade against Cuba, aggression against Venezuela, and the history, now not well known by very many people, apartheid and colonialism in Southern Africa, the very many military interventions in our Americas and regime change and coup d'etats and so on. And the crisis, of course, of Haiti being the result of colonial and imperial actions. The second strategic action is building broad alliances. And this is important to cross national political and ideological divisions. The issue of peace thus becomes a unifying theme. The Caribbean as a zone of peace, very unifying. Very important, however, to the process of building alliances. Very important, yes, to building alliances is the process by which the alliances are built. It must be inclusive and dialogue must be respectful. And in this regard, let me just make a comment on Tamanisha's statement about calling out the trade unions. Of course, I was a leader in the trade union movement in Trinidad and Tobago for 39 years. I retired almost 10 years ago, but I have a relationship with them. And the MSJ as a political party has within our ranks cadre from the trade unions. And therefore, that, in my view, of calling them out publicly will simply not enable the building of alliances. I'm not now going to speak to the kinds of quiet discussions that I and others may have, but we need to build alliances in a respectful way. It's also crucial that young people and artists are centrally involved, and the social movements that have come to the fore and initiated actions against the imperialist agenda can be the foundation for a grassroots movement against imperialism, as we must recognize that not all those who come together in the first step, which is against war, will continue in an anti-imperialist struggle, so that there are persons now in Trinidad and Tobago and throughout the region who are religious leaders, who have important voices, who are respected, who are speaking about peace against war. Even sections of the business community are saying war will not be good, and so on. So it's necessary to recognize different stages of,
One more minute, comrade.
Also, David,
Sorry,
if
I'm
you speak
speaking
a
too
little bit
fast.
slower for the interpret. Thank you so much.
Okay, I did send them my text, so I was hoping that they'd be able to follow from the written text that I also sent. Yeah. So it's necessary to have a process that recognizes that different sections of a national community will engage at different stages of the struggle, so that at this stage, which is for peace and against war, you will get a broader cross section, but the key social movements are the foundation for a grassroots movement going forward. But we also need to recognize and identify the specific manifestations in the economic and social reality of ordinary people of how imperialism impacts us. It can't be abstract or only in relation to other countries or people's experiences at any particular moment. The second question, what is important for other organizations to know? The Assembly of Caribbean People has been given new energy, new life. While we started in the early 1990s with the theme for the sovereignty of the region and the welfare of the people, the Assembly declined in activity, particularly in the English-speaking Caribbean. However, the declaration that we issued early in September gathered some 600 signatures from very many countries in the region. And this also encouraged other initiatives, such as the one by Caribbean feminists, that obtained the signatures of more than 110 organizations. So there is now a growing regional movement, and the Assembly of Caribbean People can once again be pivotal in this process, because we have on the regional committee Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Suriname, Barbados, Trinidad, and Tobago. And I want to say that our Action Day on the 16th of October, where many countries issued press statements and had other protest activities, I think forced CARICOM to issue their statement 2 days later. So CARICOM's statement was in response to the growing call on them to make a statement. Now, the second thing is that we have to recognize that the primary concern of ordinary people in our societies is about their daily lives as they struggle against the nature of the capitalist system, the neoliberal policies that impoverish them and make their daily lives difficult. And therefore, in Trinidad and Tobago, this issue of the US deployment has enabled us to address the issue of imperialism concretely. But we also have to focus on building movements locally, because if we have no strong movement locally, politically, that is clear, then, okay, one more point. So my last point about my concern for other movements, and that is that there'll be a dispersion and duplication of efforts. We are not the many, we are the few. In this conversation, we are the converted. And if we have too many organizations or networks trying to do the same thing, then we will confuse people. We have to be strategic and focused and not have duplicated processes. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you. And next, we will hear from Ivana from Mane. Ivana tiene la palabra.
Hola, hermanos. Sí, bien, tenemos algunas coincidencias en cuanto a las propuestas y también realidades parecidas acá en Ecuador. Tenemos un gobierno narcocapitalista que ha dado signos, síntomas y señales claras de que tiene una agenda articulada y dirigida ¿no? Por la agenda Trump, ¿no? Empezó a justificar el tema de la militarización con las crisis carcelarias, ¿no? En Ecuador teníamos una cárcel con suficiente tecnología, seguridad, alimentación, medicina, como para que esté tranquila. Sin embargo, el gobierno de Noboa, aceptando el plan de militarización que no aceptó el gobierno anterior de Guillermo Lasso, siendo igual representación de la ultraderecha que está ahorita gobernando Ecuador, no aceptó, pero Daniel Noboa, empresario bananero, aceptó el tema de la militarización y empezó con la crisis carcelaria donde justificó, de pronto apareció muerto uno de los líderes de una de las bandas y ahí es donde empezó a justificar, ¿no? Y empezamos con la primera palabra, crisis carcelaria, ¿no? Alineándose con el modelo Bukele, que fue ampliamente aceptado por la población desinformada, ¿no? Y se desplegó una tenaz y potente narrativa con la segunda frase, terrorismo, ¿no? Entonces entró la palabra que solamente la habíamos escuchado en las películas de Hollywood, se implementó la nueva narrativa alrededor del terrorismo en el Ecuador. Entonces, así se fue justificando el tema de la militarización, que ha ido trayendo consecuencias una vez que se le ha dado amplias libertades, ¿no? Empezó con el Plan Fénix, el famoso Plan Fénix, que era para combatir la delincuencia, el terrorismo, y un plan que nadie, que la ciudadanía no conoce en el Ecuador, ¿no? El pueblo negro organizado en el Ecuador ha solicitado por escrito que se diga qué es el Plan Fénix, cuál es su objetivo, cuáles son sus protocolos de actuación dentro de los territorios periféricos del Ecuador, porque es donde se ejecutan los planes antiterroristas, ¿no? En las zonas periféricas donde está el pueblo afro, empobrecido, y ahora también lo aplicaron en el sector indígena, acusando al pueblo indígena de terrorismo. Un tercer evento que ha explotado es la desaparición forzada, ¿no? Militares desaparecen chicos, como es el caso más emblemático en el Ecuador, los 4 niños de Malvinas, 4 niños negros que de un equipo de fútbol que pasaba por cerca de un centro comercial, se subieron a un paso elevado que le llamamos en Ecuador, una especie de puente, vieron a los militares debajo qué estarían haciendo ahí y empezaron a perseguir a los niños, ¿no? Sin que todo el equipo, incluido el profesor, pueda decir no, ¿no? Pueda decir nada. Simplemente, obviamente, fotos, se filmó el evento, hay un video de 7 minutos y un video donde se llevan a los niños a otra ciudad, los desnudan, los flagelan, ¿no? Todo sería una serie de castigos que les imponen, torturas, sin que la ciudadanía pueda reaccionar y sin que las organizaciones sociales puedan reaccionar. Entonces, desde el movimiento de Mané, hemos organizado la mesa de solidaridad por los 4 de Guayaquil, ¿no? De Malvinas, y esa sería también una de nuestras propuestas para este colectivo, ¿no? Crear mesas que ahora sean mesas de solidaridad, que sean regionales, ¿no? Que sean regionales, que sean internacionales. Ya. Y el cuarto evento de alrededor de esta militarización es los desplazamientos forzosos internos. Es decir, nosotros el fuerte de la militarización y el ejecútese lo tenemos internamente, ¿no? Aunque ahora ya hay brotes de militarización en las costas del Pacífico y una propuesta que incluso está a través de consulta popular, tenemos 4 preguntas, perdón, no lo puedo. 4 preguntas, una de las cuales es que ya esta próxima semana tenemos nuevamente elecciones en Ecuador, donde se pregunta al pueblo ecuatoriano la militarización a través de bases militares, ¿no? Una base militar en Baltra, en Galápagos, otra base militar en Salinas, en la provincia de Santa Elena, y otra base militar en Playas, que es Guayaquil, ¿no? Playas y Santa Elena han sido territorios eminentemente pacíficos por defecto dentro del Ecuador, han sido las poblaciones más deprimidas económicamente, pero también muy pacíficas. Son poblaciones pequeñas. Entonces están utilizando ya como campos de entrenamiento esta desaparición forzosa y también reclutamiento de jóvenes y adolescentes en estos territorios son campos de entrenamiento para estos chicos, donde les ofrecen sueldos. Entonces, como decía la hermana Briana, se utiliza para, como fuente de empleo incluso para los chicos, ¿sí? Se deprimen las poblaciones, el tema de los servicios básicos no se cumple, ¿sí? La educación, la salud, está casi abandonado, el tema del deporte, la recreación. Entonces, la oferta narco es narco-militar está como una opción de vida para los jóvenes y adolescentes. Entonces, frente a esto, lo que nosotros proponemos como estrategias y tácticas son las alianzas, sobre todo con los sectores indígenas que se manifestaron en el paro que acaba de terminar, ¿no? 31 días los indígenas han resistido. Si bien es cierto, el paro empezó con un desacuerdo del indigenado de la derecha, con Noboa, que ya no aguantó, por un tema racista también. Estaban en matrimonio, pero luego hubo un rompimiento, un desacuerdo. Entonces, este sector indígena con Vargas entró en choque y anunció un levantamiento, un paro, perdón, paro indígena, sin consultar, sin consensuar, sin acordar con la organización social en el Ecuador, con los pueblos, ¿no? Campesinos, negros, cholos, montubios, etc. Entonces, paro, se fue solo al paro, pensó que iba a aguantar, pero no pudo. Hay una fórmula de nuevo, es los famosos bonos, el tema del billete, empieza a rodar los acuerdos económicos. Entonces, en una entrevista que le hicieron a Noboa, y dijo, bueno, los indígenas están resistiendo, ya van 15 días de paro, ¿usted qué va a hacer? Él dijo, bueno, resistir, igual que hacen ellos, ¿no? ¿Cómo? Con plata. Ellos tienen plata, yo también. Entonces, así el paro duró más o menos 20 días en esa línea, en ese matrimonio divorciado, digamos, hasta que la dirigencia indígena anunció el cese al paro, ¿no? Por acuerdo con UNOOAN. Pero el pueblo de la provincia de Imbabura, que era donde se daba físicamente el paro, pues explotó y dijo no. La dirigencia no es la que manda, sino el pueblo. Entonces el pueblo se tomó el paro, ¿no? Empezó. Y ahí fue donde se recrudeció el plan militar, donde hicieron una real cacería, mataron a Efraín, luego mataron a otra compañera, luego mataron a otro. Hay un vídeo claramente que se ve que el militar le pega como 4 tiros en el piso a esta persona y patean a otro que corre a su ayuda, ¿no?
Ivana, 30
Aunque
segundos.
el mando militar luego dijo que no, no hemos recibido órdenes ni hemos dado órdenes que hagan eso, ¿no? Sin embargo, quedaron ahí las 3 muertes. Entonces, el pueblo indígena se levantó, estuvo así como 11 días más en una real cacería, realmente solo, porque el resto del Ecuador casi no se movilizó. Empezaron sí a moverse las organizaciones de izquierda, que dicho sea de paso, casi sin relevo, ¿no? Porque la juventud está ausente en las calles. Se hizo las fuerzas de izquierda, plegó también al paro los estudiantes de la Universidad Central, algunos grupos de mujeres, el pueblo negro del Valle del Chota salió no organizadamente, sino hizo una respuesta un poco visceral cuando la militarización quería penetrar a su territorio, entonces salió con machetes,
Hola, Ivana,
palos.
ya es el tiempo. Ya
Tiempo.
Ya.
el
Entonces,
tiempo.
termino, si me dan un minuto más, solamente las alianzas con los sectores indígenas y otros sectores, la presencia también en los espacios de derechos humanos de la ONU, que se está debatiendo la presidencia, creemos que en Ecuador podría tener esa presidencia, y para ejercer presión acerca de los derechos de los pueblos, ¿no? Derechos centrados en los pueblos, que eso tenemos un desconocimiento brutal en el Ecuador. Hasta aquí mi intervención. Gracias, hermano.
Gracias, Ivana. Thank you. And next, our final speaker of the roundtable, Brianna, and then we will open it up for a broader discussion. Go ahead, Brianna.
Thank you so much. Hi, comrades. Thank you for being here today. My name is Brianna. I'm with the Diaspora Palante Collective, as well as La Jornada Se Acabaron las Promesas in Puerto Rico. Okay, just going to briefly give context. I know that Tamanisha had mentioned earlier, and then I want to present some ideas for strategy that we have from the island. So as everybody knows, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States and has been for 127 years. A couple of the points that I want to make are points that I feel, let me talk a little bit slower, points that I feel are very important for us to keep in mind. Puerto Ricans had citizenship imposed on us, and so the inscription, the forced inscription of our people into the US military has made things complicated in the sense of propaganda. So right now, a lot of the work that we're doing here on the archipelago is to combat this idea of Puerto Ricans believing that the US military is here to help us and that the US military is here to protect us. And so a lot of that work is being done. As Tamanisha also mentioned earlier, the use of, the use of Puerto Rican lands, over 78,000 acres, is used by the US military to allow for Southcom or Southern Command to practice their military exercises, using them to invade into other nations. And the need for sovereignty and independence is extremely important for this reason, so that we can no longer be used as a US strategic landing point. The military being here, as well as other institutions like the FBI, allow for assassinations of our political leaders and also further repression of the independence movement. It's also important to mention that the current government that Puerto Rico has is a US puppet government, which is why we see them supporting the invasion into Venezuela. And because of our colonial status, we are forced to be dependent like many other Caribbean nations. So right now, as we see in the United States, the cuts of the SNAP program and Medicaid, those are also cuts that are affecting people here in Puerto Rico that are already living in immense amounts of poverty caused by our colonial status and the imposed dependency by the US. In terms of the strategic actions that are what our organization and what our people see as critical to opposing US imperialist actions in our Americas, is directly targeting US military bases. And I'm going to be clear on that. In Vieques, in 2003, our people amassed these mass mobilizations to the military base that was doing bombs testing in Vieques. And with over months of protest, of going on to where the base was, where the live action firing was happening, they were able to stop these bombings from happening and eventually force the US military to leave. And so these types of actions are very important to be able to get all sectors of the movement. So there was labor unions, students, regular anti-war activists, all of these different people that came together to be able to take this action. And we see this renovation and this rebuilding of this broad united front that is being built again today in Puerto Rico. We saw this on August 31st of this past year, when we amassed at least over 5,000 people for a protest calling for the independence of Puerto Rico. And we're continuing to work with those organizations, which is over 45 different organizations from different sectors of the movement, being able to build this popular broad united front. And similar to what Comrade David was speaking about, the necessity for us to have this, our local organizing being strengthened to be able to take these types of coordinated action, not only in our countries, but across the region. And so I think the question that I have for all of us and what we're going to get into in the discussion is how can we better coordinate amongst each other without duplicating the work, as David had mentioned? And also, how can we prepare ourselves, both as individuals and organizations, to take more militant actions? And going to the US embassies and going to the US military bases. Here in Puerto Rico, we have a weapons manufacturer based on the west side of the island in Aguadilla. It's Lockheed Martin. And a lot of the bombs that are being used to attack the fishing boats are made by L3 Harris, that has weapons manufacturers across the United States. And so how can we think about these very strategic targets to be able to actually do something to stop this militarization and the aggression on Venezuela? Sorry. I'm out of time. Okay.
One minute.
Okay. So yeah, I think I just want to present those questions. I appreciate the solidarity and understanding that as long as Puerto Rico remains a colony of the United States, the Caribbean will continue to be put in the line of fire. And so for us to advocate not only for Puerto Rican independence, but of course in support of Haitian sovereignty as well is extremely important, or else they're going to continue to use us as a launching pad. But really, I'm here to hear from you all today about what types of strategic actions we can take in coordination to be able to oust the US military bases, installations, and soldiers from our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. And thank you to all of the speakers on the roundtable. I think you have given many ideas and questions to start off this discussion. If folks, we're going to, in just a minute, we'll open it up to broader discussion. If you would like to speak, again, we ask that you keep the interventions to 3 minutes or less so that we can hear from folks and focus on the 3 questions that we sent, and we can put those questions again in the chat. Before we do that, we did just want to share one aspect of this, and then I think Comrade Ajamu has already mentioned that he would like to say, to respond to one of the questions. But we did want to share first. Oh, can you allow me to share? We did want to share a tool to David Abdullah's point about the importance of unity and the importance of understanding our local and our regional broader context. Part of the reason for the launching of the Zone of Peace, of this Zone of Peace campaign in 2023, in April 4th, 2023, in Washington, D.C., La Habana, Cuba, and Port-au-Prince, Haiti, was to think about how do we build and rebuild the structures that are both local, national, and regional to coordinate best with one another. And so one tool that the Black Alliance for Peace and Black Alliance for Peace Solidarity Network has created, and that we'd like to just share to let people know that it exists, is a mapping of an understanding of US militarization of our Americas. And so if you go to this website, I think we can drop the website in the chat. Really, this is a process this is a tool that is in a continual process of being built. And there's a lot of information here. We are working on translating this to Spanish, and then we will hopefully as well, after that, translate to Portuguese and Haitian Creole and French. But right now it only exists in English. But you can use this tool basically to understand the different installations of military presence throughout our Americas. To this point, it shows bases, it shows it shows different forces of militarization. And if you click on a country like Colombia, it has specific information from different organizations around what is being asked of nations like Colombia. The letter that this Popular Steering Committee and many of you who are here signed on to Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez, right? It lists some of those demands there. Similarly, with Brazil, it talks about Brazil's role in imperialism in Haiti and the call for Brazil to oppose this. And if we look in Haiti, there's an aspect that allows us to see some specific details and then see which other countries and organizations are playing a part in the militarization and occupation of Haiti. And so that as I said, this is a tool that is in its infancy. There are other things that you can see here as well around military bases throughout the region. And so our goal is not for this to be a tool that is only ours. It is to be a tool of the movement. And on that note, we do have an opportunity for people to directly send information to be added to the tool, and also for people to request additions. So additional case studies or information that can be worked on. Right now, again, we have the Haiti case study, and then we have some information about, Colombia, Brazil, Panama, Mexico, and some other specific areas. But we would love for this tool to be a way, as David said, for us to really understand more of the political, economic ties that tie the local, the regional, and the national together, and to support our action, as Brianna was mentioning just now, around targeting bases and targeting those installations, having the information to support that. So I'll stop there. Just wanted to give that offering to people to understand that this exists. But now I think we want to transition to discussion for the rest of our time. And so if you would like to say something, we ask that you use the function at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand. As Comrade Ajamu and Comrade Oscar have both raised their hands. Again, please, and we'll try to hear from as many people as we can. Again, please keep your interventions to 3 minutes or less, so we can hear from folks. And without further ado, go